Welcome to Creekside Chats with successful multifamily real estate investors. Dr. Allen chats with successful investors exploring their journey from setback to triumph. Through this window, we glimpse the truths that inspire our guests to invest abundantly and flourish in all areas of life. And now your host, Dr. Allen.
Welcome to Creekside Chats with successful multifamily real estate investors. I'm your host, Dr. Allen. Today's guest is an active duty Marine and has realized that service members and the working class use the phrase, "I don't get paid enough," entirely too often. The reality is that most often our financial situation is self-inflicted. After having success with real estate investing, he started from military to millionaire to teach professional finance and real estate investing to service members and the working class. As a result, he has helped many of his readers increase their savings gap, purchase real estate, and increase their chances for financial freedom. Welcome, David Pere.
Let's get started with going back in your life to your childhood. And if you can bring to mind a memorable experience that as you look back on it as a formative experience that has helped to shape who you are today.
Ooh, I had a pretty good childhood, so I would like to think there's a lot of those. I spent a lot of time backpacking with, I was in Boy Scouts, so I got to go outdoors a lot with my dad and stuff. But I think one thing that has really stuck out is when I turned 18, my dad pulled essentially all the mentors I'd had in my life. So he got a bunch of guys together that I'd known growing up, whether that be parents of friends of mine or a mentor at church or a mentor that I worked with at a coffee shop. And basically there's this like 2-mile trail near my house where I walked from like station to station, and they all said like words of encouragement and gave me wisdom for,
Wow.
like after turning 18. And as far as formative, that's probably one of the coolest things that I went through. There were a couple like, becoming a man type things that my father did really well, but and my mother, obviously they were a partner team, but I thought that was really cool. And when I look back on it, I hope that that's something I'm going to be able to do for my kids as well. Because it was pretty cool to just have a half hour, probably 2 hours where just people that I really looked up to had taken time out of their day to give me words of wisdom, words of encouragement for the future.
That is pretty phenomenal. I have never heard anybody who has had an experience quite like that. If you could share with us some of the details of that experience and really what were some of the more memorable insights and lessons that actually came from that experience.
Well, try to dig back and remember. I have it all written down. They all wrote like a letter, so I have like physical copies of everything. I probably don't review those as much as I should. But just a lot of like, for one, it was the fact that people I respected took time out of their day to give me their time, which is so valuable. And the older I get, the more I realize, some of these guys were I don't want to say like very successful businessmen, but pretty successful businessmen. And to take time out of their day, I just acknowledge now how much more that means now to me than it did then, but a really big deal. And the fact that they thought I was worth giving some of that information to. So like just all of that is huge, but then just a lot of really good advice for just life in general. Over the years, they all gave me a ton of advice, but a lot of things that I still hold dear are like advice on how to problem solve and not like to kind of pull myself back when I get emotional and try to sit back and look objectively at a scenario, which I wouldn't say I'm great at, but I'm decent, at least at acknowledging when I get emotionally involved in something and trying to step back from it and just turn off whatever that is, whether it's a Facebook post or a conversation where I can kind of feel my heart start getting a little faster and acknowledging that I need to pull back and wait. Because when you respond to things emotionally, it does not usually end well. So that's one of the things I took away from that. A lot of it was just encouragement. Just the fact that people took time out of their day to encourage me going forward, it almost gives you a sense of, I don't want to say disappointment, like whatever the opposite of disappointment is, not wanting to disappoint people. To know that there's some pretty powerful people behind you that you can call on and ask for advice. It's just, overwhelming, I guess, when you think about it. I mean, I've always tried to surround myself with people who I look up to and can ask questions and gain mentorship from. And I think a lot of that stems from how impactful that situation was.
Oh. Well, a couple of things to follow up on that. One thing, as you're sharing here, you're telling me that you tend to be an emotional person. Just having watched you on some other podcast and actually looking at the career path you choose in terms of the Marines and what have you, I never would have guessed that you would have been a person that is guided by emotions. Tell us a little bit how it is that as you get pulled into emotional triggers, now that you're actually aware of this, how is it that you pull yourself back from those triggers?
Well, I don't necessarily know that I would consider myself to be an emotional person. I think that's part of why this is so important, though, is that I kind of am. I'm in an occupation, like you pointed out, where that's not really like that's not the norm. And you know, I mean, I've definitely been poked at fun of for being soft before in the Marine Corps and whatever, because I do try to think of things that way. So when I get into a situation where I can tell that whether it's that I'm getting angry or whether it's that I'm, you know, whatever it is that's making me like overly zealous, overly passionate, where I want to say something spiteful or not come at something logically, I try to remind myself that, and I've thrown this out to the world a few times so that I have to hold myself accountable to it, where if you can't see both sides of an argument, like if you can't see something positive about the person that you're debating with, then you're totally wrong and you shouldn't be arguing. And so what I would say is, not to get into current events, but like just to use it as an example, right now there's all these protests going on with the whole George Floyd thing. And I tell myself, like, look, if I see a post and there's something going on in the thread or whatever, and I'm frustrated about it, if I can't at least think of something positive or something that I agree with the other person, then I know that I'm not thinking logically. I'm all emotional, and I'm so blockaded into my emotions that I'm refusing to see whatever that other point of view is. Now, you don't have to agree with everything, but like gun control, for example, I am a very large advocate of firearms in a lot of ways, but I can absolutely agree with some of the points that people who are for gun control have brought up. I think that there are a lot of points there. So try to find that balance. I tell people all the time, like, look, if you can't at least find one piece of their argument that you agree with, then the odds are you probably shouldn't be having that debate because you're not thinking rationally. Because there's, you know, no matter how extreme you go to the left, the right, the middle, whatever, there's almost always common ground on at least one piece of that discussion. And you got to be able to find that. Otherwise, you know that you're not centered. You know that you're going to say things that aren't really going to move the needle forward in any way, shape, or form. Because it's just, once people get emotional, progress stops. It becomes all about me and emotions, and it's just very counterproductive. I guess that's probably the biggest thing.
Some good insights there, and I'm sure they weren't easily learned. Going back to that experience from high school, you had said that that gave you the understanding and the knowledge to know that these were people that you could turn to throughout life. Have you been able to do that, to actually turn to those same people at times in your life when you needed guidance and assistance?
There's several of them that there's a few of them that I don't necessarily talk to a ton. I think it just kind of depends on how values change through life, and maybe not values, but goals. You know, some of them are people that I more or less interact with when I'm still hanging out with their son, who's a friend of mine, or one of them is a neighbor of mine, and I see him every time I'm home. But there's also people in that group who, one of them is still to this day one of my biggest mentors in a lot of aspects. And every time I go home, he is the first person I text to try to grab food with. You know, last time when I was home, we went and had dinner with him and his wife and me and my wife. And I mean, still able to just, I wouldn't even call it mentorship anymore. I think I would just call it like he's just become a really good friend and kind of a guiding light on a lot of, in fact, when I get kind of emotional about things, he's often one of the people that I will text and say, hey, I'm thinking this, am I way off kilter here? Or is this like, am I at least, do I sound like I'm coming at this from an even keel? And he's given me a lot of feedback on that throughout life. So him for sure. And there's a few others in there that I've definitely interact with periodically, but, obviously not everybody quite as much, but definitely try to stay in touch with most of them.
Well, if it's not too personal, could you give us a specific example of a crucial time and an important time when you actually did reach back to one of these individuals?
Well, there've been several. The one that I talked to probably the most, there've been several different situations where, like regarding investments, because he's kind of a savvy financial guy. He's helped me guide a lot of investment decisions, but I bounce a lot of business ideas off him. So if I'm thinking of, when I was thinking of starting a podcast, he was one of the first people I was asking, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on this approach? So a lot of guiding questions like that. As far as major issues, without digging way too deep, and I probably won't want to unpack this too much. And I'm actually going to keep this as vague as I can probably, but I had an issue where I was accused of something with a friend of mine, something inappropriate. And there was no way it stood on any grounds. It was just an accusation. It was actually not an accusation from that person so much as from somebody who was removed and saw something and observed incorrectly and had the ability to tarnish a very large portion of my relationship, or not even my relationship, but just my reputation. It was just something that did not align with how I acted as a person, how I viewed myself. And I think I was 17, 18. I mean, it was that time of my life. So it was right around this time. And that's devastating. I mean, theoretically, like a really watered down version of it would be like, I don't know, had kissed a girl and had that dad disapprove and decided that I was not allowed to see her, like some stuff like that. It was just kind of a weird thing where it's like all of a sudden I was made out to be this person that I really wasn't, due to some misconstrued information. And it was very public to everyone. And I was just totally lost. And so I've probably spent 4 or 5 hours at this guy's house with him and his wife one night, just a wreck, getting kind of hammered back into shape, as it were, which is probably why I stay in contact with him and his wife the most, because they've just really been there through some times where sometimes you get into situations where you don't even really want to talk to your parents about it, because it's just it's hard to open up. And so I guess that's as vague as I can keep it without getting people specifics involved. But I mean, it all worked out in the end. But man, that was a rough few weeks for a young man to essentially be questioning his existence.
Yeah, well, I think that just really, illustrates the importance of having mentors. And you're extraordinarily fortunate. I don't know really how many young men or women have that kind of close mentorship with older people. I think it's an unusual thing, and I think you've been real blessed to have that in your life there. It's easy to talk about our successes and our triumphs, but all successful people who really truly are successful have had to learn how to deal with setbacks and disappointments. Can you share with us one of the major disappointments in your life that you had to come through? You kind of touched on one, but that may be one you want to go upon further, or maybe there's another one.
I'm sure there's several.
Sure, yes.
I'm sure there have. I would say the biggest one from like an investor standpoint right now, and this one hasn't actually concluded yet, but I'm currently in a pretty large lawsuit because I bought a $3 million 40-unit business, mixed-use commercial building via lease option and some other things, and it went super south. The seller did not uphold their end of the contract. And within 5 months of closing, we were saying, hey, look, this is not going to work. Just give me my down payment back. You haven't done this. You haven't done this. You breached this. You didn't do this. And obviously there were issues on my end too. Things didn't go perfectly throughout this because I reacted a little bit. I don't know that I would say emotionally, just probably not fast enough in some situations and caused some damage. Just a really weird situation and a huge, I mean, we've got close to $200,000, 180, 185 tied up in this property, and then lawsuit. And it's been going on for 18 months, going on 2 years because we had to file a continuance. And so that on the real estate front has been very big because I've been trying to battle with, okay, well, I lost capital. Am I like in your head? Did I cause this? Should I be investing? What should I be doing? Overcoming the fears of what could go wrong when I'm looking at the next investments. I mean, it definitely took a little while for me to get back to the point where I was willing to buy the next property, even though all that was going on. So I think that's been, as far as setbacks that are more current, that's probably been the biggest one because it's been a huge emotional strain. I just remember my wife essentially sitting in the living room and being like, I don't care if you can figure out this deal. You're going to break it off because I can't deal with you while you're handling all this. Like, essentially just, it was such a stressor that just nobody was fun to be around. And yeah, so I guess we could probably dig into that one a little bit if that sounds up the right alley.
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out, David. And those who are just tuning in, my guest today is David Pere. He is in the Marine Corps, and also while being an active military, he is also a real estate investor. And David has just been sharing with us a major setback in his life. So, yeah, David, if you can tell us, I mean, clearly this is a huge financial dilemma, and this would be a huge obstacle for even an extraordinarily experienced investor. But you and your wife are fairly new on this investment journey, so I know this has to be extraordinarily troubling and trying. And yet, I can see you. You're back in the game. You are actively building your business, and even in spite of the ongoing emotional challenges of dealing with the situation, you're out there still pushing through it. We're coming to the end of our time here, and I would really like to explore it a bit further. But if you could tell us just one key thing that is actually keeping you going through this.
Probably the number one thing that's keeping me going through it is just the knowledge that everyone I've ever heard talk about failure who has been very successful has said that it happens to everyone. And if you let it fail, if you let it stop you, then you're never going to get anywhere. But if you learn from it and you adapt, then you'll be okay. And as difficult as a lot of this was to swallow for a lot of different reasons, I mean, especially the fact that I host a podcast on real estate, and here I am in a deal that went super south, and the whole imposter syndrome of like, well, who am I to talk about real estate if I did, a lot of that stuff going on. I think the guiding factor has just been, well, look, if I stop talking about this stuff, then it's just going to be a whole bunch of people who only talk about what went right. And if I stop doing this, then I'm going to just show and be an example of somebody who failed, fell on their face, and never got back up. And so just kind of the idea of like, look, I know why I got into this game. I know what my long-term why is. And I know that this is an avenue that I'm using to get there. Yes, there were some mistakes made, but what could you do differently? What can you do differently? I went to mentors and I asked questions, and I just kind of repositioned a few things and got back on the right path. I think we've since then, I've bought a single family house, a duplex, and we closed on a big apartment complex with a group of people. So I'm still stuck in that mess, but if I let that stop me for 2 years, then I'm just still stuck in that mess. But instead, I've continued to buy some stuff and work through it and hone my skills and processes to try to make sure that when it's done, I'm poised to execute and, assuming I get that money back, use it. And yeah, I don't know.
I'm a little amused at how you said, oh, I just got back up and got back at it like there was nothing to it.
There's definitely something to it.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, definitely. Extraordinarily difficult to go through those kinds of situations. I really appreciate you having the courage to share that with us. It's easy to talk about our successes. It's not easy to talk about our setbacks and our failures. And I really appreciate you being able to do that. We're coming to the end of the program here, David, and I have one last question. Before I get to that, share with our guests how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, the easiest way to get a hold of me is from militarytomillionaire.com, or if you find me on Instagram, it's just all one word, from military to millionaire, and not the number 2, but I'll pop up and I always respond to messages there.
Okay, great. David, my last question I ask to all of my first-time guests is, when you come to the end of this life's journey, how do you want your epitaph to read?
That's a good question. I am in the middle of a book that's part of the concept behind it. If I was to say it right now, it would probably just be like something to the effect of helped hundreds of thousands of service members, or helped. My goal is to help service members and veterans learn how to build wealth so that they are able to enjoy retirement. And so hopefully that the epitaph reads something to the effect of past tense accomplished.
Very good, David, and a worthwhile goal there for a life well lived. It has been indeed a pleasure and a surprise getting to know you. Almost always, with all of the podcast interviews I've been doing, the people who I actually get to know on this program are so much more human and real than I perceive them to be before I actually get to know them on my program. So thank you for being authentic and genuine with us today. It has been a real pleasure having you, and I look forward to future conversations.
You and I both. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to Creekside Chats with Successful Multifamily Real Estate Investors, brought to you by Steed Talker Capital. Steed Talker Capital works with both new and established investors nationwide, creating opportunities to flourish in all areas of life. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steed Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Steed Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures great and small flourish abundantly. For resources to enhance your well-being through multifamily real estate investment, connect with us online at capital.steedtalker.com.